It's been a little bit, so it felt like a really good time to come on here and give an updated 2023 NFL mock draft. Yeah, exciting stuff, right? Keith Bear, get in mind again that this is only the beginning of February. We've got almost 3 months until the 2023 NFL draft, so a lot of what you see here is certain to change in the weeks and months ahead. But nonetheless, we can still talk about it, and I can give you some thoughts, like some very preliminary early thoughts on this upcoming draft. So my one-round mock is in the description box down below. You can check it out. And surely lots of things are going to stand out here, or you might want some answers for. First, certainly a number of people that watch my videos are Bears fans, so they find themselves asking, what are you mocking the Bears to do here? And it's always interesting because it would be stupidity on a monumental scale for the Bears not to trade out of that first overall pick. That almost feels a given. And they're lucky here as opposed to maybe last year when the Jaguars had that first pick. There wasn't a quarterback worth taking that high so the Jags could trade back and get a bounty of picks. That's why they took Trayvon Walker. Similarly, the Lions stayed put to Aiden Hutchinson. There wasn't a quarterback there. The assumption is you're going to have a couple of quarterbacks there, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 that are worthy of being top 5, top 10 picks. Helps the Bears, right? Especially if you have one that feels like it's worth taking a quarterback number 1. One of these guys is probably going to fall into that spot. And you've got a lot of quarterback desperate teams. So if the Bears actually stayed put at number 1 and didn't take a quarterback and then took a defensive player on top of that, Ryan Poles should be immediately fired for sheer incompetence and stupidity. Doubt that would happen, but if it did, immediate shit canning. But I see a lot of Bears Twitter talking about, the Bears trading back from 1 to 4 and the Bears trading back from 1 to 2 and then convincing themselves they're going to get 2 and 12 from the Houston Texans, and who knows what the hell happens. But here's what I know. There are a lot of other quarterback desperate teams, both in the AFC and the NFC. And it feels like a lot of Bears fans are tying themselves to, I don't want to move back too much because I want to be able to get one of these high-end defenders. And it's just missing the whole plot of anything. Why restrict yourself? Like in this particular mock, I have the Bears just trading down once or trading back once from 1 to 9 where the Carolina Panthers are. They've hired Frank Reich as their head coach. You have to believe they're pretty desperate for a quarterback, and I'd assume they want to go the young quarterback route. And for them, it makes sense, right? In a division with Tom Brady's just retired. So do they really believe in Kyle Trask? Are they going to bring in somebody else to play quarterback? Atlanta, do you really believe in Desmond Ridder or Marcus Mariota? No. Do you worry potentially if you're Carolina that Atlanta might want to go up and get a quarterback? Perhaps, and you want to jump them. And then New Orleans doesn't have the long-term answer there. What are you going to go, Jameis Winston or Andy Dalton or Taysom Hill? Give me a freaking break here, right? So you're a team like the Carolina Panthers. That quarterback, if you can get that dude, like that could position you to run that division in the NFC South for several years. And when you look, frankly, at the dynamics of the AFC versus the NFC right now, you look at the quarterback position, and you talk about Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, you've got Josh Allen, Trevor Lawrence if you want to go there, Justin Herbert if you want to go there. You still technically have Lamar Jackson in the mix. And we haven't even really counted about, what about if Deshaun Watson comes back to near elite form? The point I'm getting at here is that AFC could be a meat grinder to try and get through in the next few years because of the young talent at the quarterback position in that conference. Meanwhile, the NFC, what do you got? What do you got? It's why the Bears have to be so intentional about building around Justin Fields, because if they think he could be that dude, it positions the Bears to be a contender. Because the NFC got old and boo-boo at the quarterback position in a really big damn hurry. Does Jalen Hurts really feel like an elite guy? Ugh. And then you look at the rest of the NFC, you say, ugh. So my point is, as much as Bears fans keep focusing on Houston and they keep focusing on Indianapolis and trading back to those spots and not want to go back any further. God forbid, in an offense-first league, you'd want to miss out on the high-end defensive players who may not even be the best players at the respective position, talking about Will Anderson and Jalen Carter. But you've got other teams that are going to be desperate to try and get up there. You've got teams like Atlanta, potentially, Carolina. Go flip over to the AFC. What about Tennessee? The Commanders at 16. There are all types of options available here. So it'll be really interesting to see how these dynamics go. If you're a Bears fan right now, you want these quarterbacks to really kick ass in that offseason process. Because the more they do, the better off you are. And it might even position you to trade back multiple times in round one. Because again, this draft for the Bears is as much about acquiring draft pick capital for 2024 and 2025 as it is anything else. Some of you may be surprised when I have CJ Stroud going number 1 here and then Will Levis being the second quarterback taken. And, I haven't done my deep dive on the quarterbacks yet, so this is not reflective of any personal ratings or anything. This is more of a reflection of thinking, I'm not sure that an NFL team would be as convinced to move up to number 1 to take a 5'10" quarterback with good but not great arm strength, good but not phenomenal athleticism. Like, as a general rule, you don't want to take outliers on the downside with these really high premium picks. Like, you look at Kyler Murray a few years ago. He was an outlier. And what have the Cardinals been able to do with him, realistically, right? Baker Mayfield, a year before that, he was the number 1 overall pick. And as a 6-foot quarterback, he was an outlier too. And that shit didn't work out so well. And I think some NFL teams, like if we actually had some insights into what NFL teams were thinking, I think you'd be surprised by how many teams will look at that size, that arm strength, some of those considerations, and would not only not have Bryce Young as QB1, but wouldn't even have him as QB2, and some may not even have him as QB3. I promise you that's the case. I promise you. Now, you could counter that and you say, well, it only takes one team. And that is absolutely correct. It only takes one team to trade up and draft a C.J. Stroud number 1, or a Will Levis number 1, or a Bryce Young number 1, or somebody to take Anthony Richardson in the top 10, along those lines. It only takes one team, and that's always the unpredictable dynamic when it comes to the draft. But for the purposes of this mock, I had Stroud going 1, Levis going 2, and Bryce Young going 4 to Indianapolis. Am I quite sold yet that you deserve to have 3 quarterbacks go in the top 4 of this draft? Not really, but I could be. But I will tell you, as I look at the landscape of this draft overall, I've got the Bears taking Broderick Jones, the offensive tackle from Georgia, at number 9. More of a reflection of, I assume they're going to invest some money in the defense in the offseason and free agency. You need to surround Justin Fields with as much help as possible on the offensive side of the ball. There appears to be good edge rush talent and depth in this draft, so it shouldn't be as much of a priority to take one of these guys high in round 1. Whereas you look at the offensive line class, there's good depth at tackle, but that's more in maybe the round 1 to 2 range. So especially when you think about offensive tackle, traditionally the best players at that position come as very high picks. You have the outliers for sure. Jordan Mailata for the Philadelphia Eagles, I think he was like a 7th-round pick. That shit can happen. Bears fans are going to say, Braxton Jones! Yes, Braxton Jones, it was a 5th-round pick, right? We'll see what his long-term upside is as a left tackle. But the point is, more often than not, if you want a high-end left tackle in the league, you've got to draft them with the 1st or 2nd-round pick. That's not my opinion. That is the actual empirical reality of the draft and the league over the past couple of decades. But I'm just not so convinced that you should be investing a super high pick as an edge rusher here, as I'm not sure that there's much differentiation between some of the round 1 guys that could go in the top half of round 1 and the guys that you would take in rounds 2 or 3. As much as people want to say, well, you take the best available player. That's dumb. No, that doesn't happen that way. More often than not, teams are drafting best player available at a position of need. But need is the crux of what they're doing in the draft. That's what they're doing. You could argue it, but that's not accurate. teams don't sit there and say, yeah, all this other crap. But you can look at like positional value in relation to the rest of the class. I don't know if I like this draft class that much. This feels much more to me very early on, as I'm starting to get caught up here. This feels more like a day 2 and 3 draft than it really does a day 1 draft. As I look at some of the talent at some of these different positions, and I'm not seeing a lot of slam dunks. I'm not seeing a lot of guys that I, at this moment at least, feel like I would really pound the table for. Now, I reserve the right to come back and change my mind on that, but it might be rounds 2 through 5 that you want to have the picks in this draft more so than trying to, get as high up into round 1 as possible. I could be wrong. But as I look at this class, the positions stand out. The edge talent is really good here, I think. Corner is a pretty good position. Wide receiver seems a bit weaker. You got a good offensive line group. I don't know if it's special offensive line group, certainly, but a good offensive line group. And it all will ultimately come down to the quarterbacks. And if 2 of these quarterbacks in this draft end up being franchise guys, then this draft class looks a whole hell of a lot better. If this ends up being like a 2011 type of draft, you could see a scenario where you have 4 quarterbacks going in the top 12, and then, it's Cam Newton at 1, had a really damn good career, and the other 3's washed out and busted out. You talk about Locker and freaking Gabbert and Ponder. But that 2011 class that looked like, hey, man, you got 4 quarterbacks going to the top 12. They don't really deserve it. Most of them didn't, right? And there were questions about the rest of that draft class. That ended up being an all-time draft class. That could happen here. It's hard to know. It's a crapshoot. But just, again, a couple months out, so a lot is going to change here. But those are some of the early impressions of this draft for me. I'm curious to hear what Bears fans think about, the fact that there are other options and should be more appealing options than trading back from 1 to 2 or from 1 to 4. And then I'm curious for other people in general, how are you ranking these quarterbacks right now? And most important question of all is, in a few weeks when I've done watching all the quarterbacks and I've done all my grading, who do you think is going to be my quarterback 1?